here's the pitch part of today. A coaching session where we'll match this approach with, a little deeper analysis. So Pete's got a question. Yeah, Pete asked, you mentioned simple sentence structure being good or the data suggesting it's positive. How does that jive with semantic triples and semantic layering? I think there's a conflict there. And I think that there is, I think we end up with a couple things. I think we end up with two sorts of content, one that is aimed at the LLMs and one that is slightly more nuanced. But I also think you can do relatively simple structure, i.e. not writing like I do, and incorporating semantic triples. So semantic triples, just good writing is going to reflect its semantic triple. And, Hemingway's got semantic triples in every one of his sentences, I would bet. Layering's a little more complicated. And then you ask, is it retrieval versus training? I think it is, there's a bias towards training. So, training runs are going to respond because of the volume and because of the, you're constructing the vector relationships in training as opposed to trying to influence them. You are trying to relate entities to one another in training runs. And it's slightly more complicated because if you look at what happens then in sort of the MOE or the reinforcement learning stuff, it looks more like inference than the training runs themselves would look like. So I don't know that I have an answer for that. I don't know that necessarily. I just was looking at some of the, there's a paper 2 weeks ago. Actually, it was somebody's PhD diss that I stumbled across. They kind of looked at this question of how much does RL impact how training data is represented. And I came away with being a little confused, but also thinking that reinforcement learning ends up looking more like inference than it does like training. And I can't off the cuff give you a stronger answer than that. I can go back and sort of look through that paper and see if it meets sort of my smell test. So it's a really good question. And I don't know the answer right now. And I'm not sure that the answer is known or is knowable at this point. But I do think training ingestion and inference are probably getting closer together than where they had been in the past. So, the original training runs for LLMs looked a lot like image recognition models because that was the state of the art and still is the same in some senses. So, image recognition diffusion models are different from LLMs. But they were the first to be really well trained or have good results, I guess is probably more accurate. And so that image models are trained in a very certain way. You give it a bunch of images and then there's human labeling, or they use an image data set that has labels on it. So, an image of a cat is labeled as an image of a cat, an image of a dog is labeled as an image of a dog. And then you give it a bunch of those, and then it goes through the process of like trying to differentiate between the human labels and the images, the pixel mapping, and then it tries to write onto a new image, essentially its takeaways from the human labeled stuff, and starts labeling images on its own. And then humans basically check that. That's the process by which image modeling is done. And so that process in training diffusion models is the way that the Chat GPT-1 and Chat GPT-2 were trained, because that was the state of the art, and that was the recognized best way of, sort of programming all this stuff. And now we've got a couple things happening. We've got the MOE, the mixture of experts looking at training data, meaning multiple sort of sub AIs looking at the training data as it comes through and making judgments on that as it's ingested into the model. And then you've got the piece where we've got reinforcement learning, where it takes a training set and then generates, and then it grabs synthetic data from other LLMs and parses that through reinforcement learning. And so we're now multiple generations away from that fusion model. And we also have a situation where the AIs are now guiding their own training. I don't know how, we don't know in GPT-5, for example, how much of that was training was guided by AI informed coding, where the AI is in real time, like optimizing its training runs. You can look at DeepSeek, the DeepSeek papers, and see a lot more of that. Also, the Allen Institute models 2 through 3, where the AI is interpreting its training data through the run, kind of bootstrapping itself. And we don't have interpretability. We don't have visibility into a lot of that stuff. So it's drifting further and further away from the diffusion models, and it makes it more and more difficult to sort of make that interpretation. So that is a deep rabbit hole, and now I'm like 5 minutes down it or more. So I'm going to punt on answering that question. But as long as the data that we see is kind of has this orientation towards structured data, then that's what I would go for if I am trying to either create ground truth, or meaning ground truth being something that the model takes on its training data and incorporates in. So the relationship between entity X and entity Y is some vector or some cosine product, or cosine similarity or dot product. I am lost in the weeds now thinking about all this. I'm going to go back to pitching, which is what I wanted to do. Anyway, hopefully I covered some of that stuff. Anyway, I'm launching this Hidden State Drift Mastermind, looking at AI and tactical SEO execution, but also kind of the bigger issues of AI automation and building tools, and what it takes to sort of create a deliverable on that end. One of the problems is that all this stuff is moving so quickly. It's very difficult for folks to keep up. It's difficult for me to keep up. So one of my goals in creating a mastermind is to help others keep up, but also force myself to keep up by going through the exercise of working through problems and not just focusing on the outcome, but focusing on understanding the problem and the solution path well enough that I can explain it to others. If I sit down and work on a problem, like in the data set that we were just discussing. I follow the path that I follow, and it's oftentimes not the most structured path because I'll come up with new ideas midstream, and it's just not necessarily conducive to the best outcomes. Whereas if I focus on a solution path that I want to be able to communicate to other folks, I end up with usually a better result and also a more efficient process for myself. So that's the selfish reason for building this um, as a mastermind endeavor, but also just to help folks keep up, um, and then refine my own thinking through the Socratic method by having Pete asking me questions that I don't have answers to. Here's the issue that I have with most masterminds that I've been a part of. One is that there is kind of a unidirectional uh, focus, meaning whoever's doing the mastermind has their material, they present it, and it is not necessarily interactive, um, and it is really driven by what they're thinking or what they're working on, versus uh, the needs of the folks in the mastermind themselves. So I think there's two ways to cure that. One is to have the sessions, the mastermind sessions themselves, be a little more open in structure. Two, to have one-on-one meetings with uh, basically kind of consulting sessions with people participating in the mastermind to find out where they're at, so that there's a better match between people's needs and the content that's created and then delivered. So what I am proposing is a mastermind with a difference. One is that anybody that signs up for 6 months is going to get a 30-minute consultation, basically, almost like an intake process, find out what folks' priorities are, what their pain points are, what their capabilities are, what their asset sets are. The other thing is less structured, and that will be office hours, which, anybody familiar with, if you had a decent professor, you could go in during office hours and ask questions and just have a free-flowing discussion. Some of the best courses I ever took, it'd be multiple people hanging out in an office and peppering prof with questions. Had an econ prof who his name was Ruben Zubro. Um, I was not the best student in college, but I remember coming into one of Zubro's office hours, and he was sitting around with his postdocs, and I'd missed a couple classes because I'd been traveling, and this is when we had the market collapse in October of '87, and in office hours, the postdocs were sitting around. This was like, I think it was Monday after the collapse. I think the collapse happened it was Black Friday. But I went in to get the assignments that I missed and try to catch up and plead for forgiveness for missing a pop quiz, and ended up sitting in and on a great session with Zubro talking about market dynamics and the crash, and postdocs offering up their stuff. And it was just one of those things where I learned more in that 45-minute BS session about equity markets than I learned, the rest of my life, all considered. It was really an amazing thing. And so I want to try to foster that environment again, where people can just come in, surface topics, ask Pete type questions, and get people talking about it and get ideas that aren't necessarily my own, but just have that kind of free flowing discussion. And the last piece that I really want to make work in a mastermind is something that I don't want to drive, but I want to give the opportunity for people to create external accountability mechanisms with peers. And so I've done this after a couple of events where we've done these PAGs, these peer accountability groups, where there's small groups. So say if there's 10 people in the mastermind, then we would have 5 people in a peer accountability group, and they would share, some goals and some timelines, and just talk through that stuff, but keep people on track. You know, I've done events where I've hosted them, or co-hosted them, and I walk away from the event with a big list of to-dos, and rapidly stuff happens, and inevitably you get off track and you don't focus on the takeaways, or you go to a bigger event like an SEO spring training, and you get a half dozen things that you're going to try to work on, and you end up executing on 2 or 3 of them. And those 2 or 3 things can provide a tremendous amount of value, but that other stuff that you could have also provided value goes by the wayside because you're not working with other folks that had the same experiences, or you don't have that external accountability. Most of us are driven by commercial needs or client needs, and those always prioritize the urgent and sometimes not the important. And what I want to do is give people some tools where they can focus on the important as well as the urgent. This is a regurgitation. The model's broken. That's probably an overstatement. AI helped me with that, you can tell. But I want to have a mastermind that is, that is not just my ideas, that actually is where my ideas are nothing but a point of departure, and where people can surface things that they need, and do it in a way where it's going to maximize benefit for the entire group. And then the other piece is the implementation piece. I do like this. Inspiration without implementation is just expensive entertainment. Want to break through, want to deliver some ROI. So, a little explanation of peer accountability groups. There's basic. It's a very basic process. It's set clear goals, whether you do that jointly or you do that on your own, but you create goals that you can share. You want measurable objectives, and you want regular check-ins. So these groups would meet once a month, or maybe more frequently if people wanted to. But that's what folks can kind of self-select. And then celebrating wins, because frankly, when you do something pretty cool, if you don't have anybody to share it with, you can get burnt out, or you can enjoy life a lot less. And so I think that process of celebrating wins, however you do it, whether it's taking your wife out to dinner, your spouse out to dinner, don't want to be gender specific here, or doing something fun with your kids or your family or your friends or whatever, celebrating wins is important, and finding a little vehicle to do that in is damn cool. So that's got to be part of the process with a PAG. And then we talked about monthly office hours, but that's just a chance to connect with folks. It's always easier to solve other people's problems than your own. At least it is for me. I'm crappy at solving my own problems. I'm much, much better at finding solutions for others. And folks that sign up for 6 months at a shot, they'll get that strategic consultation, that onboarding session. And then in the second 6-month session, we would come back and do kind of progress and optimization. So these intakes will be after we've done a session or 2, and then kind of a check-in and refocus at month 8. And then the core sessions will be twice monthly, power sessions, where something like today, where we've got a problem, we've got a path, and then we look at solutions. But probably a lot more granular than this talk, where we probably would either go into Claude Code and build some stuff, or we would have some stuff that's built in parallel to the sessions. So it can be painful to build live and online. So we probably see some stuff kind of time-lapse photography style. And that's it. Here's the pitch. Blah, blah, blah. Where strategy meets implementation, where you finally ship. So anyway, that's Hidden Drift. And you can, yeah, this is going to be limited. I'll put the actual stuff here if I can find what I did with it. In here. And hopefully this works better than the Zoom links did. The biannual and the monthly. So the price points are, for right now, I think I'll stick there. The 6 month is $579. The monthly is $105. So the 6 month gets you committed, gets me committed, triggers that consultation, which I think is key to maximizing value and doing something different from these other programs. And the monthly is at 105. So you don't get the consultation. Really like this mountain peak image here with the sun somehow situated between this peak and the other mountains in the range. But anyway, it's amazing how I get off on my own tangents, isn't it? Anyway, taking this back, 6 months, I hope people are interested in doing as you're watching this either live or in the recording. Would love to have folks get involved. It would help me immensely to drive my own business forward, and hopefully drive folks' business forward as well. Or just for some folks, I think this is going to be an opportunity to explore AI technology and tech stacks, even if they're not necessarily in an IM or SEO space. There's going to be something, I think, for everybody. It's going to be, a lot of it will be research driven, meaning either research that I'm doing or research that I'm reading. That's my working style and has been for a number of years. I read technical or scientific papers in a variety of areas, health, longevity, exercise science, a lot of stuff in social sciences on a regular basis. I try to read 2 or 3 papers every week, and then I try to implement or create learnings from them that I can pass on one way or another, either creating content or, just executing in my own life. I'm going to bring the same approach to these masterminds. I'm going to continue to do my own primary research on things that I find interesting, particularly now with data for SEO. It's an amazing, amazing tool. It's really transformed the way that I think about SEO and the AI overviews and LLM content stuff, because there's now a very powerful tool set that's very accessible and very cheaply so. But there's tons and tons of other research that needs to be kind of brought to bear. I think there's literally probably 150 AI papers published, most of them pre-pubs, every week. Sorting through those things, I use Semantic Scholar to kind of build citation trees and look at stuff and surface stuff. There's also a couple other platforms that I use to kind of screen that academic seed material. But that's the way I work and have worked for years in various areas. I started doing this type of stuff back when I was in my 20s. I was the International Association of Political Consultants invited me to become a member when I was, I think, 27 years old. And so my piece was always trying to look at the political science and social science research, particularly on the quantitative end, and find tools and approaches that the consultants could use kind of in real time. And I remember my very first presentation, which was back in 1994, I think, where I did, chi-square analysis of voter file data. I think I was maybe the first person to do that, certainly the first person to do that in sort of that context. Other academics used voter file data in various ways, but was using it to probe for causalities and patterns and targeting information, that kind of stuff. So I've been doing this type of stuff for a long, long time. And it's what drives me, that and systemic failures, my other intellectual hobby. And that's the kind of focus that I will try to bring to a mastermind. So with that, if anybody's got any questions, you can ask
Darren,
them.
would you just one more time quickly run through the 6 month one and what we get for that?
Sure, 6 months would be maybe. Can I run through them? I cannot. Anyway, the big difference. Oh, here we go. The big difference with the 6 month is A, it's cheaper, and B, these onboard sessions, the 30-minute one-on-one consultations. I'm going to go ahead and have office hours open to everybody, whether they're monthly or not. Thought about doing that just for people doing the 6 month. But really, I think this is the piece where other masterminds fall down a little bit. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. Right now I'm paying for just one mastermind, and that's Derek Pierce's. I'm not trying to cast shade on what he does, but I've been part of several masterminds over the years. And this office hours piece is really, I think, something that's necessary because it opens up and lets people surface their stuff. I guess the other mastermind that I'm part of, which isn't a paid mastermind, is what Garrett does every week. And most of our sessions kind of turn into office hours at the end, and that's really a valuable thing. I guess if you're paying for TSD, it's part of the thing, and not enough people are taking advantage of that. So hopefully that answered your question. The peer accountability group is going to be for everybody, and that's not going to be something that I drive. I'm going to set up a framework. I will drop into I'll drop in periodically in the first meetings of each PAG, but that's going to be they're not top down driven. They're people talking to people. It's peer accountability. So that's whether you do the monthly or the 6 month, that's going to be part of it. And that's really going to be, something where people don't have to participate in those. That's not mandatory. But I want that to be part of it. I want to stop going to events myself and walking away with, a bunch of things that I don't execute on. From like spring training, my big takeaway was Greg Ortiz's stuff on N8N. I'd had N8N set up for a while. I had not executed along that path, and I'd been on that actually from the AI event I had done here in Denver a year and a half ago. Clark Mackey did a quick session, much like he did for Camp SEO Darkest AI, Holly and Ice thing, where he explained how to do N8N. Of course, N8N was nowhere near as capable in 2024 as it is today. But I took that on board, and then I didn't do anything with it. And it took me to something that Greg Ortiz said, um, clicked in my head. It was like, oh, now I know what I need to do. I need to go and I need to take all the N8N documentation and I need to put it into a Claude project so that I've got all that material in one place and I can ask questions of it and have it do my workflows for me, or at least help me figure out how to do my workflows. Because N8N is not exactly a friendly environment. I mean, it's once you get used to it and can, you know, freeze the data and look at the steps and stuff, uh, you eventually get some comfort level with it. But and I could not have done what I've been able to do in 8N without that idea. That I don't think it wasn't something that Greg said, but it was something that he said that spurred me to the conclusion, oh, what I need to do is I need to take all the documentation and some working workflows and put all that in a Claude project so that Claude could use that as sort of ground truth or a RAG, however you want to term it, and use that to inform the work that it does. It's the same process that in Claude Code that you do with when you give it access to context 7, I think it is the API documentation. That MCP has a ton of API documentations in it, and then Claude Code can work with that, or you can do it through Klein. But once you've got that on board, then everything's in one spot, but also it's got the resources there. It's not constantly going out to search for documentation, et cetera. It's got that ground truth available. So, that one 30-minute session with Greg took me down this entire road that I would not have gone down. But then as you get to sticking points, what do? You really need that extra kick in the pants that you get from having other people saying, well, 2 weeks ago, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z by, the 15th of the month. And having, that piece of that deadline for a deliverable, even though it's just internal to yourself, is pretty motivating for me. Not everybody works that way. And I realize that there are people out there that don't, that can continue on multiple paths at the same time and execute on everything that they ever wanted to execute on. But I don't think that's a very common thing. I think a lot of people go through, particularly this stuff where we're technologists, right? We are working with evolving technology stacks. We are working on literally the bleeding edge of things. If you are particularly in the SEO environment at this moment, you've got to be doing the basics and the fundamentals, but you also have to be executing on keeping up to speed and finding new ways to do things and keeping the ROI available for you by exploring automations and agents. And that's where we are right now in October of 2025. And I think that's where we are going to be for a period of, at least 36 months, maybe longer. I do think we will get to the point where the agents will be powerful enough and accessible enough that a lot of this stuff will happen without us actually having to dig in and get our fingers dirty or get the grime underneath our fingernails. But for right now, wherever you're at in this ecosystem, you've got to do stuff that isn't that has a longer term time frame for execution or end goals than just the stuff that you've got to get done this week, whether that's content creation or a report for a client or whatever it is. I think you've got to lift your eyes to the horizon a little bit to be effective and stay competitive. And I think that the easiest way for me to do that is to have some type of accountability situation, whether it's with peers or, a lot of what I do is I tell my wife that